Okay, well, let's get to it. Welcome to Getting Started with Digital Film in Research, Managing Editing and Best Practices. I'm Francesca Albrezzi, and I did my PhD in the Department of World Arts and Cultures/Dance here at UCLA. And now I'm a digital research consultant in the Office of Advanced Research Computing, or OARC. I also teach for the Digital Humanities program quite frequently, and sometimes for my old department, World Arts and Cultures/Dance, or WACD, as it's sometimes called. I have an expertise in extended reality technologies, or XR technologies, and I trained as an art historian and studied filmmaking at that other school, USC, at different periods of time. So this is drawing off of that sort of knowledge base that I have. So an overview of our agenda for today. First, we're going to talk about methods versus methodology. So we're going to dive into some frameworks for using film as a research method. We're then going to talk about pre-production and production reminders. This is going to be sort of a checklist for conducting mobile ethnography so that you have something in your pocket that can help you in this process as you prepare. We'll talk about equipment and software recommendations, so options for you when you're working in the field. And finally, we'll focus on file management and basic editing in a couple of different platforms, really just setting yourself up for success when working with digital footage. So let's get into it. Today, we're going to be focusing on the practical and technical, so the what to do and how to do it. But I also want to acknowledge that a big part of using film for research is theoretical. And that theoretical side is all about why do we use video or film for research? And that can happen in two different ways, right? And for two different reasons. It can be data collecting, right? It's sort of for later, for transcribing, for documentative analysis, to be added as an appendix, perhaps, to a dissertation or a paper as evidence. And it's also, or could be, in addition to, or differently from that, could be to make films as a primary research output. So since we are not getting into the theoretical that much today, I wanted to start with just some resources that will help you with the more theoretical side of things, the why film for research purposes side of things. And these are just sort of tried and true references for you that I highly recommend. So Sarah Pink's Doing Visual Ethnography is a fantastic resource, as well as the Cross-Cultural Filmmaking, a handbook for making documentary and ethnographic films and videos. Obviously, very up the alley of this workshop. Aparna Sharma, I want to recommend her classes that she teaches in World Arts and Cultures/Dance. She really particularly teaches this very topic of the theoretical side of research as, or film as research. So definitely, if you have not had the privilege and pleasure of taking her class, I highly recommend that. Also, she's someone who's interested in the feminist aspect of filmmaking. And as many of you probably know, women in film, well, it's a minority group, to say the least. So this next resource, Female Authorship in the Documentary Image, Theory, Practice, and Aesthetics, is if you're interested in sort of that gendered approach to film studies, this is a really wonderful resource for that, particularly for documentary. Then I have three resources here from Leonie Sandercock and Giovanni Attinilli. And these are wonderful for thinking about how digital ethnography can move both hearts and minds in policy. So we have digital ethnography as planning praxis, an experiment with film and social research, community engagement and policy. We also have changing the lens, as well as multimedia explorations in urban policy and planning beyond the flatlands. So these are examples of people who are using filmmaking to actually make change in the world from an activist or policy perspective, particularly with urban planning in mind. In terms of sort of some of the technical underpinnings of the editing room and what to do in the editing room and approaches to editing, I would recommend Norm Holland's book, The Film Editing Room Handbook, How to Tame the Chaos of the Editing Room. It's really written from the perspective of sort of an older brother. Norman was someone that I knew personally and was a wonderful teacher and human being who's no longer with us. But this was a great resource, continues to be a great resource, and I can't recommend it enough. Also, Walter Murch's book with Francis Ford Coppola, In the Blink of an Eye, a perspective on film editing. And this will really sort of tap into the artistic approach of film editing. Editing is an intervention that can really make a difference. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Jaws anecdote. The movie Jaws that Steven Spielberg is so famous for sat on the cutting room floor for ages because the shark just didn't look realistic. They couldn't make it work. And it wasn't until they brought in a new editor who made an entirely new cut of the film that it finally worked, and mostly taking out the shark and building that sense of suspense really transformed the way that that film felt to an audience. So editing has obviously a big effect on the outcome of research as well, the way that you put those pieces together, the way that you string together the narrative. And so that's something to really think about, which we won't get much into today since we're going to focus on the technical side of things, but these resources will help you address some of that. Okay, so pre-production reminders. Let's get into this sort of checklist before you get started. There's a quote attributed to Benjamin Franklin: "By failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail." So you can only edit what you shoot. So here are a few things to remember while you're doing pre-production. Before you get started, there is some careful planning and some clarity you need to have about what you're doing and why. So you'll need clear research objectives. What is the purpose of the shoot and how does it meet your research objectives? You want to write those things down. You'll want to be really clear on that before you get started. You need a strong focus of research methods. Why film and not just audio or not just photographs? What is the purpose of capturing this way for research? What makes you use this method as opposed to others? So make sure you know why and you write that reason down ahead of time, or those reasons, I should say. Capture what you need and not everything. This is really hard, but avoid the euphoria around shooting as much as possible. Don't just keep the camera rolling to keep the camera rolling. You'll hate yourself when you get into the editing room. You really want to try to avoid that. Yes, I see a hand up with a question.
Sorry, are we allowed to ask questions while you're going through the slides? Is that okay?
By all means, please, Amira.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm really driven by this. I like the whole thing about what you need and not everything. I struggle, and I don't know what your thoughts are on that based on your own expertise. And maybe this is case by case, right? Because I struggle in the field. It's intense movement. It's a ceremonial. It's like sacred, and there's a lot of movement, right? And to me, even though I have specific ideas of like what I need to shoot, but then you never know what to expect in the field and what might happen. And then I find myself like literally shooting everything just because I don't know later on which one I'll need more. So
Yeah.
you might go into the field and have this idea is like, oh, I need just to focus on the dances today. And then a lot of things are happening, women labor. And then I'm like, no, I need to capture that, especially if this is something that it's not documented, not written. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that. And thank you.
Absolutely. No, it's a fantastic question. And I think it's one that everyone who's ever shot ethnographic film struggles with. So you're definitely not alone. My best answer for this is that's what pre-production is for, right? Pre-production is for you to have a set plan, a set of things that you know that are on your checklist of definite things that you want. And then that opens you up to the happy accidents and the, serendipity moments and the wonderful things that happen in the field that you just can't turn away from. So because you have that checklist and you've thought it through in advance, you know what you need to capture. But then when that spontaneous thing that happens, you can be responsive to it because you know you have your plan, right? And that means that then you can go back the next day, and we'll talk about this when we look at some templates, right? You can go back the next day or the next morning and go, okay, so in my plan, I had day 2 shooting these 4 things. And because this wonderful other thing happened, I lost this kind of footage. Can I squeeze it in on another day, or can I cut back on other things? And then you can adjust your plan accordingly, right? So I think that's the way that I find it's really helpful to respond to, what's happening in the field. The other thing that I will mention, and we'll talk about this more when we get into equipment, is something like a 360 camera. If you're looking for context and you're looking for things that are happening all around you and you want to make sure that you're capturing as much as possible, that'll allow you to get 180 on each side. And then when you're in the editing room, you don't have to edit it as 360 footage. You can actually edit it as a frame and decide what you want that frame to be. So that's another approach to some of this, right? In terms of, oh, if I don't have my camera right in the right place at the right time, can I still make sure I'm capturing something that's happening, if something's happening on this side and something's happening on that side, how do I capture both? Well, a 360 camera can allow you to do that, and then you can cut together those 2 sides later. So great question. I am sort of following up on that. My next point was know the deliverables, right? It's a great question, Amira, and thank you for asking it. Knowing the deliverables is honestly what helps me avoid that capture everything euphoria. And this is also something that has to do with understanding what sort of screen or medium you expect as an output. So is this going to be watched on an iPhone or on a big screen? That's going to really affect what kind of equipment you use and what you hope to capture. Also, that'll shape, like, should you be shooting portrait or landscape? Is this something that you're preparing for TikTok or Instagram, or is this something that's going to be, shown in film festivals? That'll really shape some of those deliverable decisions. Also, again, have a plan and execute it with discipline. When shooting, you should have a daily schedule in advance of all your locations and how long you plan to be at each one. If you can, scout them out ahead of time. I highly advise that. If you can't, make sure that you're factoring in time into your schedule where you have a sense of setup and sort of chance to walk around and get familiar with the surroundings before you actually start shooting. In your schedule, you'll want to mark out time for setup, rehearsal, shooting, breakdown, and cleanup as well. Don't ever forget that. You want to leave the space as you came into it, right? You should also create a shot list, which details all the footage you want to capture. You may even want to storyboard to know the exact framing that you want to get for particular things. That can be really helpful in this process. It is time consuming, but ultimately it sort of pans out in the long run for your storytelling. And also, what kind of establishing shots do you need? Do you need B-roll? Do you need aerial shots? That'll also affect what kind of equipment you bring with you. Maybe you bring a drone. All of that is something that you want to have as part of your pre-production checklist. So just to showcase a few templates here, you should have a film schedule written out before you go on your shoot, and you may wish to share it with those who are involved so that they have a sense of what you're planning. It'll likely not look something like this. Yours will look a little different because it's not for a fictional movie shoot, but it should address some similar concerns. So I've shared a template here with notes on what kind of information you will want to have throughout this process and what you want to have marked out in advance. You can organize it into a chart or a list. It's really up to you. To organize it, you can use a chart or a list, whatever you prefer, but you want to know all of this information and have it written down before you go on your shoot. And I'm just going to click out here just to give you a sense of what some of this information is. You'll have your shoot title. Definitely have a list of essential contact info, people that you're going to need to know. Maybe they're going to let you into a building. Maybe there's someone that's going to be there to help you with equipment. You want to have all that contact information up at the top. You also want to be really, really clear about time, or order of show, as I like to call it, right? How is the day going to unfold? And what's supposed to be happening at what time? That'll really help you with time management and make sure that you're keeping to a schedule. So you want to think about the arrival time. Do you need rehearsal time when you get there? Do you need setup time? What time then are you going to actually start shooting with all of these other things, right? After you've set up, when is that go time? When do you press record? You want to think about the expected duration of your shoot. And if you want to factor in breaks. For a lot of people who haven't been on camera before, it's an intense experience. And you may want to give them a moment to settle into things. You may want to have a couple of questions that are just warm up and just an opportunity for them to get used to, if you have lights around or it's an unusual setting or they're just not used to being in front of a camera, that it gives them a second to settle into the shoot. You want to know what time you want to stop shooting, and then leaving yourself time to break down and pack up and leave, and then have a clear time where you need to leave the site. In addition, you want to have your locations detailed in advance. You want to know the address, the contact info for the location if there is one. You want to note any access details that, if someone needs to let you in, who is that contact person. So want to maybe mark things like facilities. Is there bathroom or AC that you might need to know about to make sure that you have comfortable conditions for yourself and your interviewee. Also backups, right? If something goes awry, something happens, what's your backup location? What's the plan B? You want to have a list of the people that are involved and their contact information. This includes who's being interviewed, who's on hand to help for equipment or assisting with the interview itself. Maybe you're not the interviewee. Maybe it's more comfortable for you to be behind the camera and have someone else do the interviewing because they know this person better, right? Think of those things in advance. That's part of what this template is to help you with. Also thinking about, not only who will give you access to the location, but maybe there's handling of special things. Maybe you're doing this in special collections and you're going to need to have staff or a librarian on hand to actually show you pieces and turn pages or present objects and set them up in a very particular way, right, for your shoot. Also be clear about your capture goals. Make sure that this is part of your film shoot template. You want to have a detailed shot list. We'll talk a little bit about what that template looks like in a minute. But you'll also want to have your interview questions in advance and research questions and objectives that the shoot addresses. You want to be clear how those interview questions are then serving your larger research goals, right? What's the connection between those two things? And make sure that you have a clear understanding of that before going in. And finally, equipment requirements. I highly recommend creating a checklist of all the equipment that you're bringing with you so that when you leave, you can go through and make sure you've gathered everything that you brought in and you don't leave anything behind. Equipment is expensive. You want to keep it with you. Also, are there materials that you need for the interview itself or the set, so to speak? So do you need objects? Are you in special collections? Do you need props, so to speak, or something like costumes? Do people need to make sure that they bring costumes that they can change into if it's a discussion of their cultural background or their cultural practice? Maybe the costume is part of that and they're going to be explaining it. So you want to make sure that everybody knows that and that that's being brought in. Also furniture, right? Are you sitting for the interview? Are you standing? Are you on a couch? You want to think of the setup and the blocking for your shots ahead of time if you can, as much as possible. Finally, last but not least, snacks, water. Make sure that you take time to eat and drink and nourish yourself during these long shoots. It's very, very easy to get caught up in the moment. Don't forget to stay hydrated. Don't forget to have a snack with you at all times, just in case. And also along these lines, you might want to add something like medical needs or conditions to be aware of, right? This is something I'm just thinking of, but if someone is a diabetic on set, it's important to know that so that you can be prepared. If they're comfortable in sharing that with you, just to make sure that everyone is always as safe as possible when shooting. Okay, so that's an example of what a film schedule template might look like in preparation and pre-production. Then, in addition to that schedule, you will want to have an even more granular document, which is your shot list. And this is to organize what kind of footage you want to capture. Then you note what kind of footage you did capture, along the lines of what Amira was asking, right? If maybe you didn't get all that you wanted, or maybe you did, this document can be used as a checklist to help you organize that in advance and keep track of it. And where you might want to go back and make some pickup shots the next day if you have that opportunity, or make cuts to the schedule based on what occurred in the field. So if you had an opportunity to shoot something that you weren't expecting, now that's sort of thrown off your shot list. This document will help you keep track of that and help you sort of think through, okay, well, with the time I have left and the resources available, how do I still get the most out of this field experience? So this isn't my template, but it's a pretty decent one that has a lot of the basics for standard shot list. Something that I'll point out here, I'll just quickly open it up. And to make your own, you can go to File, Make a Copy, and that's how you'll make your own, and then you can edit it to your heart's content. But a few things that I want to note here, just so that you're aware. Shot number, right? How many shots you want to take that day, but also IEDN. So IE is interior or exterior. So thinking about whether you're shooting indoors or outdoors, and then day or night. This will dictate whether you need extra lighting, different things that might need blankets or things like that if you're going to be outdoors at night, it's cold. Change your costume, change what you wear to the shoot. It's just helpful to have that sort of tracked. I think everything else here is pretty self-explanatory. I will note that it says to take notes, right? To circle back, make sure that you know what you got and what you didn't, if you liked the take, if you didn't. This is why reviewing dailies is really important, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. And then you can also see there's another note here, total time for the scene. So that you have an estimate of how much time you're spending on things, and that'll help you sort of plan as you go along and adjust. Okay. So because you're working with human subjects as part of your research, I encourage you to explore going through the IRB process. This is done through the Office of the Human Research Protection Program, or OHRPP, at UCLA. And in case you're not familiar, this is a quote from their website. The Office of the Human Research Protection Program is the administrative arm of the UCLA Human Research Protection Program. The OHRPP, in partnership with the research community, is responsible for ensuring the safety and welfare of participants in human research projects conducted under the aegis of UCLA. So the OHRPP, which is a division of the research administration, provides the campus and the 5 UCLA institutional review boards, or IRBs, with professional guidance and administrative support. It's recommended that you consider going through the IRB process to help with things like protecting at-risk or vulnerable subjects, to prepare your interview questions in advance. Now, as any of us know in ethnography, a lot of this can be semi-structured, right? We go in with with an idea of what we want to ask, but obviously we're responding to the people in front of us. So it's okay, and they understand that. A lot of what we're doing is probably not necessarily at risk for vulnerable populations, but we want to make sure that nonetheless we're respecting their rights and we're thinking about that ahead of time. It also helps you consider what you want to shoot in advance and plan for alternatives if things don't go as planned. And it can get you sort of ahead of the curve when it comes to things like managing consent, permissions, and release forms. Okay, so part 3, equipment and software. Options for when you are working in the field. So you have good footage, or having good footage, I should say, often relies on you having equipment that you can count on to get the job done. So we're going to talk a little bit about equipment now. So what do you bring with you for a shoot, specifically a mobile shoot? Well, this is a photo shared by my colleague, Dr. Yokwano, who created a documentary called Human Error, which focused on the fallout from the nuclear power plant disaster in Fukushima, Japan, that occurred in 2011. In the film, this is a quote from its synopsis, the film follows a group of people whose lives have forever been disrupted by the disaster: a nuclear power plant executive, a priest, a traveling inn owner, a farmer, a mayor of a local town, and an 86-year-old evacuee. It is through the lived experiences and oral histories of survivors that the repercussions of the troubled nuclear industry in Japan are humanized, and the understanding of man-made disaster spaces is unveiled, educating the global community on the hidden perils and consequences of man-made disasters. So this is what he brought to shoot those interviews. Some of this probably looks pretty familiar, but I'm going to go through and share some of my latest recommendations for equipment for mobile film ethnography. A lot of people now are shooting with their phones in the field because phones have become, well, great camera sources. Whether it's iPhone or Android, you can get a really, really incredible picture with a phone now. In that case, you may want to upgrade with something like a beast cage with interchangeable lenses, and this will cost you about $150. And I'm just going to show you a little bit here, do a little demo, live demo. So you can see this big black cage. This is the beast cage. And what it allows me to do is add interchangeable lenses on the front to get a different, even sort of more cinematic picture. And you can also add on, we're going to talk about sound in a minute, but things like a dead cat and a Rode mic so that you can get even better mobile sound as you're shooting. And that is a really great option. It's lightweight. You can bring extended chargers with you. And honestly, it's becoming a fantastic way to capture in the field. You can also add an adapter to that in addition to put full-size camera lenses on top of it if you wanted, which is kind of amazing. The sort of next step up, what I might recommend is a digital single lens reflex camera, or what you've probably heard of as a DSLR camera. So I'm going to show a few of these again. I'm going to, oop, this is coming up. Hold on. So this is a mic that can attach to your DSLR camera in the field, right? It just slides in here. It's another Rode mic. So slides into the top of your camera. You can get really, really great sound. Again, this has some coverage on it so that in case of wind and things like that, you're prepared. These cameras can change in size. I don't know, am I holding it up enough? There we go. Feel like those makeup tutorials. Can you see it? So here's an example of one DSLR. This is a sort of bigger size. There's also smaller, right? So depending on what kind of space you have when you're traveling. A lighter option may be better, especially if you don't need as big of a lens per se. And again, you can always bring different kinds. This is again, another sample of a Rode mic that you can attach on top to get higher quality sound. And these will range from a couple $100s to about $1,000. And I recommend the Canon D, R, or S series, depending on your budget. These give you lens options. And for example, I'm using a 25mm lens, Canon, as my web camera at the moment. So it can get you really good picture quality and still be fairly lightweight to be able to use it in the field. I do want to mention that for professional shoots, right, many people upgrade to things like RED cameras for really high level documentary filmmaking or just filmmaking in general. These are industry level cameras and they often cost around $50,000. But if that's where you're at now within your documentary process, those are industry standard. I think that's what they also use at USC. And they create beautiful digital picture. I mentioned earlier 360 cameras. 360 camera capture is a fantastic thing for the field, mainly because, as we were just talking about earlier, if you're not sure where the action is always going to be, you can set this camera sort of into the center of the area and capture things all around. These things are also really lightweight and pretty cost effective. The Samsung Gear 360 is around $170. You can even get them used for less. And then the Insta360 ONE X2, this retails for a little over $400. And this can shoot between 4 and 8K, depending on what cameras you get. You can upgrade even to something slightly bigger. This is again an Insta360 product, but you can still see they're fairly small. And what is nice about these 360 cameras, what I've noticed about using them in the field, is because they're so small and they sort of set on a monopod, they end up fading into the background and people tend to forget that they're there. And so you have people relax a little bit more into the interview, and that can be something that is really desirable, right, when you're doing this ethnographic work. So it doesn't feel as intrusive within the space. I do want to mention a few apps that can be useful. So things like the DJI Go app, which if you don't need to necessarily have a drone to use the DJI Go app, but it does allow for you to, if you've shot anything mobile on your phone, you can tap into that library and it will give you a quick AI edit of your work. So if you're looking to put together just a quick trailer or sampling of some of the things that you've shot in the field and get it out there quickly, add some automatic music to it that's royalty free, and put it out there for publicity or for sharing with people that you've been working with, it's a sort of fantastic option. And it's a free app, so you can make use of it if you wish to. There's also Insta360. If you're working with 360 cameras, that will also give you some editing options. And they have in-app editing features and also a social media platform as part of that too. So you can tap into others within the community. This is really a community of practice for people who use 360 cameras, and that's a wonderful resource as well. I would recommend thinking about things like tripods, selfie sticks, and gimbals before you get out there. Make sure that you have what you need to support your camera work. A lot of cameras now have built-in stabilization, and yes, you can adjust that in post, but these things are going to make your life a lot easier. And also, your arms in the field, give them a break sometimes. A tripod can be useful, but also things like a gimbal, right, are going to get you a really cinematic shot. And things like the, for example, the Osmo, right, it's not that big. It's quite small. It's handheld, and it's going to give you a really, really cinematic look to your work. You can do pans and tilts, and the camera stays very, very stable, and it works with your phone. So it's a lovely thing to have when you're out in the field. Finally, battery backups. Don't forget your power. I highly recommend, if you're working with a mobile device, purchasing some of these. This is a solar powered battery pack. You can plug into it, you can take it with you. It can charge your phone as well as other things. It really is a useful tool to have on hand, and it doesn't cost that much. But also remembering to have things like extra SD cards, plenty of memory on your phone, or cloud storage on your device if you have it, and bringing an external hard drive to you with you, because you're not always going to have access to Wi-Fi. So making sure you think through when you're going to have access to Wi-Fi, that should be part of your schedule. Making sure that you're offloading as much as you can every day, in the evening, so that you're ready to go again in the mornings, making that a part of your sort of ritual process in the field as you're shooting. And again, having, sort of solid state hard drives that are small and compact that can come with you, external hard drives. So, sound. It's easy to forget, but it is so critically important, especially if you're doing documentary work and you're working with individuals who want to capture their voice, right? So things like a Rode Wireless Go, or a Zoom Field recorder, which is essentially known as a lavalier, or a lav mic, or you maybe you've heard it as a lapel mic, or a clip mic, body mic, collar mic, deck mic, or personal mic. All of these things are the same thing. We just have many, many names for them. And essentially what that does, it's a little power-packed mic that can clip onto someone's clothing. Sometimes they're wireless. For example, the Rode Wireless Go is wireless. And these will allow for you to get sound very close to the individual who's speaking. Just a fun fact about lavalier, the term lavalier, it originally referred to jewelry in the form of a pendant worn around the neck. And it's used as the name of a type of microphone that originated in the 1930s, when various practical solutions to microphone use involved actually hanging a microphone from the neck. If you haven't seen one of those before, I recommend looking up on Wikipedia lavalier mic, and they've got a great drawn image of what that old mic looked like. It's quite fun. So in addition to something like that, you may want to consider a Rode video mic, either the MEL, MEC, or just ME, which comes with that dead cat that I showed you. I know it's a kind of awful term. It's essentially just a fluffy cover that goes over your microphone to combat sort of wind sound. But essentially this can just hook on, and this is an example of those ME series mics. So try to pull off this dead cat here. It's very tiny, and it just connects onto your phone. So it actually has, at the base where you normally put in your charger, it's got one of those. It taps in there, and then it gives you better quality sound for your mobile video capture, and you can put one of these on it in case you're out on a windy day. The other thing that I might recommend is bringing headphones with you into the field, so you can check your sound quality before you're recording and after you're recording. And also something like a 360 zoom mic for ambisonic capture, if you're really interested in sort of something like the sound of the forest. You want to be able to get a 360 full-blown sound capture of that. This is going to give you higher quality sound. So that's another thing to consider when you're in the field, depending on the nature of your research and what you find is an important goal. And I've just added another sort of long resource list here. These are just a few of the things that I recommend, but there are many, many out there. And you can check those out, and there are options available. They've been making this easier and easier as things go along, which is quite remarkable. So a lot of options now for mobile. You may want to use natural light as much as possible when you're on the road, and I highly recommend that. But just in case, I always recommend bringing along something like these Pseudophoto LED T12 or 15 little packs of light. And they actually really, they can attach to, they have things here where they can attach to, oh, where is it? Here it is. They can attach to tripods. You can screw them on and set them up, and they can really pack a punch. They also have color. So if you want to add sort of more mood lighting to a particular scene, or if the sun is coming down and there's something reflective happening and someone's coming out really yellow and you want to kind of counteract that, you can use something like this to help. So these are really light and pretty powerful. Here's another example. This one's, I don't know if you can see it, it's turned on, but it has sort of an orange light. You might be able to see it on me. So it can give an option for you when you're out in the field and you just want to make those small adjustments to light as you're shooting. In addition, extension cords, power adapters, bring them with you. You never know when you're going to need them, but you will inevitably need them. If you're going to another country in particular, right, you want to think about if they're on a different power grid system, making sure that you have those power adapters to enable you to charge up all your devices and make sure that you have the battery that you need. So that was a lot of information about equipment, but I just want to make a quick note here to seek funding to pay for your equipment. This is part of your, an essential part of your research and our teaching, and you should get support for it. So here are a few grant options to check out. And also feel free to share others in the chat if you know of any. We're here to build a community of support and practice here. So please let me know. And I'll also just pause here for questions if anybody has questions on equipment that I've mentioned thus far.
I had a question. I'm gonna go a little bit back. Earlier on, you mentioned something about being aware of the furniture, costume, and all of that in background, right?
Sure.
And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on, if you do that, wouldn't that be perhaps staging, imposing, rather than having it just more spontaneous? I know this might be more of like a on the film side of things, but
Yeah.
I'm just wondering.
Absolutely. I think that will speak to your methodology, right? And actually setting a standard, it's a great question to have, and it's something that you should be setting a standard for in terms of your film practice in your pre-production, right? We're going to walk in there and we're going to use the space as they have it. And or I'm going to follow whatever my interviewee suggests that we do. If we're going to be sitting on the floor, then we sit on the floor. If we're going to sit at a table, we sit at a table. If we're in an open space, we stay in an open space, right? I also think, again, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in terms of approach and sort of creating a structure, right? You may have a vision for how you want this to cut together, and therefore you may want to have something like everyone sit on a couch because that's a really comfortable space. I want everyone to have sort of a similar background, a similar look when we're capturing the interview, because I want them focused on the words and not the context, right? I want them focused on what they're saying and not the environment. Or it may be the opposite, right? I want people focused on the environment and we can do narration over it later on, but I really want to be able to capture what's happening in this space. That's more important than me sort of focusing on capturing every single word that someone's saying, because we can I can do that in post and sort of narrate it. So I'd be curious if there's other people on the Zoom that might have other approaches, but I do think it's something that can get set sort of in the beginning and respond to your methodology.
Mm, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Paul, I'm noting your question, talking about research and proposal. What could be initial budget where I can have the basic equipment as you mentioned? So again, it depends. You may have an iPhone already and then you're just sort of buying the bells and whistles. So maybe 500, right? If you're wanting to get a beast cage as well, things start to add up. But all of the things that I've listed in these slides have links to the equipment and can give you a rough estimate. So they have prices there. I know I've done that for the film and video in particular, but the same goes for the mobile. I just didn't put the prices here, but so that you can sort of put together your own budget based on what you think your needs are, because it can really vary. But it's a great question. And even with a couple of $100s, you can up the quality of things quite quickly. And some of this can also be done in post. And we will talk about what are your options in post to help you. For example, if you didn't have a dead cat or a really great sound capture, what can you do to reduce background noise, for example, that's easily done within any of the software programs that I'm mentioning. So it can be depending on your budget, right? And all the editing softwares that I'm going to be sharing with you today are either built into platforms already that you'll have access if you're through UCLA or through an educational license, or are free on the internet and an industry standard and work for all operating systems. My goal here is to make sure that these things are as accessible and as affordable as possible. But great question, Paul. I hope that's helpful. So Norma is asking, is there any place we can borrow some of this equipment if you are grad or undergrad? Great question. I know that, for example, World Arts and Culture / Dance has a lending program if you're a student there. I believe there is an AV, I know there's an UCLA AV where you can rent out things like microphones and speakers and some equipment. Theater, film, and television, I know, has rentals for their students. I would imagine other departments have computer labs and things like that. I would always recommend speaking to your advisor or an administrator in your department about what you have access to and what they know is available. For example, the humanities technology group, so HumTech, has 360 cameras that you can rent for free from them. And they're really, actually, they want people to use this equipment. They've purchased it and they would love for people to be using it. So if you're in a humanities department, it's definitely something to make use of. So they have cameras like these Samsung Gear 360 2s, and they're fantastic. They're really, really great. They slip in your bag, they connect with your phone, and you're up and running very, very quickly. Okay, so some practical things around file storage and management. You've done this shooting, right? You're in the field, you're getting this done. One thing that's really not the most exciting, but actually really, really important, is labeling your footage. And I highly encourage you to do it sooner rather than later. You want to be consistent, and you want to make sure that your labels are recognizable, ordered, and detailed. So here's an example of what a label might look like, right, for a file. You might have the location of where you shot this footage. You might have the interviewer's name or interviewee's name, who you were speaking to within this footage. The session number, so if you did more than one shoot with them, is this the first time you shot with them, the second time you shot with them, the third time? maybe the topic, if that's more relevant. So maybe you were having a series of conversations with people, and this time you were talking about, um, um, one specific topic, and then you had a chat with them again, and it was a different topic. That can be really useful to have in your naming convention. And of course, a date, right? Making sure that you have the month, day, year, all of that there so that you can remember exactly when this footage is from. Also, of course, safety is of utmost importance. Cloud-based obviously will allow you to kind of quickly upload your footage and know that it's in the cloud and know that you have a backup instantly. But you may be in the field where there's low internet speed. So in that case, I really highly recommend having a hard drive. And at Boast, having both, right? Having your footage somewhere on a hard drive and somewhere on the cloud. Can't always do that, but if you can, I highly recommend it. Making sure these spaces are password protected and also have dual factor authentication as much as possible is also really, really important in terms of safety. We're in a digital age where phishing happens a lot, and these are precious interviews with people. You want to keep their privacy private, so it's important to have things behind a dual factor authentication. Okay, then production, meetings, and notes. It's important at the beginning of your day while you're in the field to do a daily preview of what you shot the day before. This will help refresh your memory. It'll allow you to take notes on the footage in situ and then store those notes with your files. So factor that into your schedule if you can in advance. And for example, I recommend adding an image and a descriptive line within those notes so that you sort of can jog your memory when you're going back and reviewing later on down the line exactly what that footage covered. Maybe it's a series of images, just snapshots from that footage, but it allows you to sort of remember, oh yeah, okay, so we were here and we went there and then that happened. Okay, that's where we went and saw that bridge. Got it. Right? Because you were doing many things in a day, perhaps. So reviewing dailies is really, really important, and taking notes on those dailies each and every day that you're in the field is critical. Also, make plans for things like transcription processing, editing, and subtitling. These things take time, and oftentimes we think, oh, the shoot is the most important thing, but after the shoot, it's actually the post-production can be quite time consuming. And those things are really important to making your footage accessible to others. So you want to give yourself enough time for that. Okay, so you may wish to decide on a basic structure for the way that you edit your interviews. And this will also, like we were talking earlier, may also affect the way that you shoot your interviews. So you want to think of some of this basic structure stuff in advance. This will create an editing pattern, which will make it easier on you and easier for your viewer too, since they'll know what to expect each time they play one of the interviews. Structural choices also connect with your methodology, as we were talking about. Do you want these interviews to be as raw as possible? Only the basic edits for convenience, like heads and tails of things, which shows minimal intervention. Maybe that's what's most important. Or do you want to provide a more scripted edit that perhaps allows you to tap into the emotion of what it was like to hear these stories from your interviewees and gives them some gravitas or lightness, right? Echoing the experience that you had in the telling of their stories through the aesthetics of film. Do you add voiceover as an introduction or while you're playing B-roll to provide greater context? Do you cut like discussions together across interviews or present one respondent after the next, sort of as separate events, right? These are some decisions that you might want to think about, again, in pre-production, knowing that you're going to have a structure when you start to edit. Maybe it's a title, then an intro, then some B-roll, instance, then the interviews, right? Maybe it's cutting in between. You want to sort of have that idea of that in mind ahead of time. But I also encourage you to do several different cuts to explore what different structures afford you and assess that alongside your chosen methodologies. So the beauty of edits, right? The beauty of editing is that you can play around in post and see what is most effective and most matches with what your chosen methodology is. Before we jump into a brief introduction to 3 editing tools, let's quickly go over some basic editing vocabulary just to make sure that we're all on the same page. Bins are just like folders where you keep all your clips and media. So this can be video, audio, images, etc. In editing, we call these bins. So the way that you sort of group those things together rather than folders, we call them bins. This also allows you to sort of organize sequences, right? You may have bins for a bunch of different things. It's not just thematics or not just day 1, day 2, day 3, but you'll want to create a bin structure that makes sense to you. So that's why understanding what bins are can be really important and help you along the way as you're editing. Then we've got markers. So markers indicate important points in time and help you position and arrange your clips. You can use a marker to identify an important action or sound in a sequence or clip. And markers are for reference only and they don't alter the video. So think of them as, like little tags that you put on your book, Post-it notes. They're essentially your Post-it notes. They're there to help remind you where you think you might want to cut a clip. And that can be helpful as you're sort of reviewing, right? Going through your dailies, reviewing what's there. You think, yeah, I think this is where I want to start. And you go down the line, yeah, and I want this clip too. Actually, I want to stop it here. So just as you're starting to think through what it is that you actually might want to cut together, you can use markers to help you do that. Then in and out points define a specific portion of a clip or sequence. So marking is the process of setting the in and out points of a clip, but not actually clipping. The in point is the first frame you want to include in your sequence, and the out point is the last frame you want to include in that sequence. In a typical workflow, in and out points for a clip are marked in the source monitor, and then you bring that down when you're ready to make the cut. Or as you mark the in and the out, then you can bring that down without actually cutting the clip. The software knows, okay, that's where you want to start that clip, that's where you want to end it. So it brings down just that section for you. Adjusting a clip's in and out points after it is edited into the sequence is called trimming. And so you can always do that as well. The timeline is the area of a video editing application where you arrange your video clips and map out all the edits you'd like to apply. So from start to finish, you'll see all your video clips, audio clips, effects, and transitions laid out in chronological order as you work. And we'll see that in a minute as we get into some of these applications. And you can then put one piece of media on top of another shot so that both images or sounds show on the screen at once. And this is called layering. This used to be a really complicated thing back when we were working before digital film, and now it's quite easy with digital editing. So yay for that. There are 3 editing softwares I'm going to introduce today. The first is iMovie, which is standard for all Apple devices. Just a show of hands or in the chat, how many of you are using Macs or Mac products, Apple products? 1, 2. Okay. So we've got a couple here. So iMovie is a great option, not just for getting started. It's really becoming quite useful in many settings. So iMovie is what we'll take a look at first. Adobe Premiere Pro is part of the Adobe Creative Cloud Suite, so I wanted to mention it here. We won't go into it much, but we'll get some basics. And then we'll also talk about Davinci Resolve 18, which is a free industry standard editing software for both Macs, Windows, and Linux, actually. And I'll take you through a live demo of that. Hopefully there are no gremlins today, no tech gremlins. We're gonna hope and wish. I'm gonna pause here for a question. Dr. Lisa asked, what software should we consider when incorporating publicly available footage or media from films, TV, or research, for our research? So any of these platforms can handle bringing in outside footage and bringing it together. Something like Davinci Resolve actually was created for VFX, and specifically they have a really great color section. So if you're thinking that the footage may have very different feels, something like Davinci Resolve 18 can help maybe standardize that a little bit, but all of these tools can really do that. They're very highly powered. Maybe iMovie is less so than the other two, but you should be able to crop things, deal with different aspect ratios, to try to make the best use of different kinds of film. And I can show a little bit of that. I think we'll show a little bit of that later on, but if we have follow-up questions about that, I can put together a little side tutorial and add that so that you're aware of how to sort of zoom in on certain things. I also have a tool that I'll talk about at the end called Clip Grab that allows you to pull anything that you want down from YouTube, whether it's an MP3 or an MP4, and make use of it for your research. So this is a great option if under fair use, right? You need to use something that's out there already. This can get it for you, which is really, really useful. I hope that sort of answers your question, Lisa. Great. Okay, so let's start with iMovie. If you have an iPhone or an iPad or iMac, you'll have access to iMovie for free, and it's a great tool to start with. I do a lot of my just very basic quick editing when I don't want to think too much about it with iMovie. Now, because this workshop is only 2 hours, I'm going to give you a beginner's guide video that I've found and I've reviewed for you that'll give a sort of greater detailed version of an introduction to these tools. And then I'm going to point out specific things that I think you need to know with each one of these tools. So forgive me if it's a little jumpy, but I wanted to make sure that I covered a lot of ground here. And then we can also follow up if you have specific questions about a specific tool that aren't answered in these beginner's guides. But I like to start with iMovie because it's a pretty powerful editing program, despite being designed for simple, quick, on-the-fly editing. Because of, like I said, because of the time limitations today, I'm not going to do full tutorials, but these are really great resources. And as you can see, they're quite thorough and will cover a lot of the things that we've mentioned already, things like color correction, voiceover, separating video from audio, and such. But no matter what software you're using, there will always be some basic edits that will make a big difference. Most editing platforms will also operate in very similar ways, as you'll see today. They will have an area to organize your media files, this media area, or an import area, an editing area, or a timeline to manage your cuts and transitions and visuals and audio, and a preview area to view what you've created thus far. I suggest that you start by creating a title slide. Title slide for your project as maybe a PNG file, and place it in front of your video clips. Set it for about 2 or 3 seconds in length, and then followed by a transition. This will help you keep track of which project is which right as you open them, right? And this slide can also be helpful when keeping track of dailies and various iterations of editing. Add whatever information you want to this slide, this title slide, and as you move through the editing phases, it can be really, really helpful. So what I tend to do, and I'll sort of explain it here, but you can just, in iMovie, drag and drop or use the browsing feature to import both your video files and your PNG, which you can create with PowerPoint or Google Slides. And then you pull that into your My Media window, which is right here. Once they are imported, you will drag the image and clip down into the editing space below. So it's just a click and drag, very, very easy. Do this in the order in which you want your sequence of clips to be in, right? You can always reorder things later, but it's helpful to start with one clip at a time and work in the order that you envision. And even before you do that, you may want to review your clips and create in and out points here, right? Just in this media area to allow you to sort of preview each one, get a sense of what footage you actually want to use of those clips, and then bring them down in sequence. You can also use the sliding scale here on the right. And that will allow you to adjust the how big the clip appears in your timeline. And that can be really useful just in terms of viewing things, right? When you pull a clip down, it may appear very, very big and you don't know where the beginning and the end of it is. The sliding scale can help you make things much tinier, and that can make it more manageable, especially when you're first starting out and cutting through things. Once you created a clear beginning to your video clip, you can begin to trim the subsequent footage. So it starts where you actually want to start. You want to start, right? Obviously where you want to start and not where you've hit record. So you can use the trim feature, which just allows you to click at the front and drag over. And that will allow you to shorten your clip at the beginning or at the end, right? If you want to take out something in the middle, you'll need to use split clip. To split a clip, move your cursor to where you want to make a split, right? And so here you can see there's this line, and that's where I want to make my cut. And then I'm going to right click and select split clip, as you see here. Or you can use Command B if you're on a Mac, right? And then you'll select what you want to delete. So you can tell the clip, or you can tell which clip is selected by the yellow outline around it, and you can then right click on the clip and select delete, or hit the backspace or the delete button to also delete the clip. And so you'll want to do, if you're trying to cut out something in the middle, you'll want to split the clip twice and then delete the thing in the middle. If you don't want what is known as a jump cut, which is just a straight cut without a transition effect, you can use one of your top menus above the media area to select transitions and pick from the options that are available here. They sort of give you a preview, and as you hover over, you'll see the preview actually play over your selected clip. So dissolve will be the most subtle effect, but you might choose to play with effects depending on the editing tempo and style you decide to use. Once you pick one, click and drag it between the clips that you want. And you can double click on the transition icon to set the duration of the transition if you want it longer or shorter. This will also be automatically limited by the length of the clip before and after, so keep that in mind as you're playing around with the length of the transition. And usually transitions are set only to about a second or two. Any longer than that, it can be, it calls attention to itself. So just make note of that. Next, there are a few adjustments to sound that can be very helpful. You may wish to fade in your sound just slightly so that people can adjust their speakers and don't go from total silence during the title slide to your booming voice if it's a voiceover or whoever you're interviewing. Uh, what will also help with this transition and the quality of your presentation or your film sound overall is to make sure that you've selected to reduce background noise from your entire presentation when within your audio settings. So that occurs just above your preview window. I'm just going to go back here so that you can see. It's just above your preview window. You can go up here where you have these setting options. And if you click here, you'll see a toggle for reduce background noise, and you can play around with this scale. You want to be a little careful of how much background noise you reduce because it can interrupt the natural speaking voice, but you can push it above 50% if you'd like. And this will again help in that post-production, right? If you didn't have a dead cat with you while you're filming, or perhaps the recorder that you had with your phone, you didn't have a separate microphone, you can actually use the equalizer to adjust for the actual voice quality that you're trying to achieve. And that's just really, really quick settings that can actually greatly improve the quality of the film footage. In some cases, you may have smoke, or you can delete and replace audio if you need to. So for example, I did a recent workshop where I accidentally said Biographical Society instead of Bibliographic Society. Oops. So I recorded myself saying bibliographic and replaced my incorrect audio, which you can see here. So I actually brought that in as a separate sound file and then was able to drag it below. And what you'll notice here is that I was able to split these clips and turn down. See how there's no sound here? This little bar here in the center controls the audio levels. And so if I want to delete the sound from that area, I click on that line and bring it down, and it allows for me to get rid of that sound. And then this sound becomes the primary sound for that section. So it's a really great way to be able to replace audio or add music if you wish to your footage. And just so that you know, whatever you have a video track and an audio track whenever you're editing. And when you have something below or above, so if I had a second video track above, and we'll talk about that more in a minute, those will be primary. So if for some reason you're like, why does this keep cutting away to something that's not what I expected it to be? Well, you may have a track that's on top and that's interfering, and it's going to go with whatever the topmost track is. So even if you have 2 or 3 video tracks, right, it's going to go with the one that's most on top for that portion of the timeline. So always keep in mind how many layers you're working with. It is also helpful to remove sections where you have long pauses. Perhaps you were setting up the next question or pausing for an airplane, or maybe your interview subject is just taking a while to think about your question. Taking those things out early on can speed up your editing process because you're able to just focus on the meat of the clip. So here you can see this clip with the yellow box around it, right? So you know that's the one that's selected. But if you notice, there's not much sound there. And that's because I was getting ready to make a transition. So I split the clip on either side, right? Command B, and split the clip on either side, and then extracted it so whoever's watching doesn't have to sit through that dead space. And so I could easily focus on the next moment within my cinematic work, or what I was putting together, what I was cutting together. And then remember to split a clip it's Command B, or as Norma, yes, it's great to remember. You can use keyboard shortcuts. If you get used to keyboard shortcuts, they save you so much time in the editing room. So most useful thing ever, absolutely. But you can, if you can't remember the command, the key commands, then you can right click and then select split clip, and then select the clip that you want to get rid of and hit the delete or backspace button, and that'll take it out for you. You may also want to insert new material that your interviewees discussed and that you didn't have on hand at the time. And maybe something changed since the original filming. If you take a screen capture or select images, or you want to add narration, you can add that to your film structure through some quick editing. So here I've layered some new narration and added some static images of a manuscript and some close-up screenshots of a URL to make my points clearer to my audience. And all of that was just brought into my media and then dragged in here with some audio narration underneath it. And that allowed me to build out that section a little bit more in post-production. I'm also going to show you a little bit later on how to actually do layering clips, where you can do quick cutaways and you don't actually have to split clips in order to make that happen. So let's switch gears now to Adobe Premiere Pro, just so that we can address a little bit of that and what that, I'm not sure why it's not presenting here, but the video is linked within the notes in case you want to review this beginner's guide for Adobe Premiere Pro 2022. So it's the latest version. But I want to point out that in case you didn't know, if you are a UCLA student, you can get an Adobe Creative Cloud license, and it includes Adobe Premiere Pro for free as part of the school's academic licensing. So please do check that out and make sure that you go get access to the Adobe Creative Suite for all your possible needs. And when you open Premiere Pro, you will be asked to confirm if you want your project to be stored. The project location can be the default installation location or a custom location that you select or create. But once you decide, you'll next select where your assets are located and bring those in. So similarly to iMovie, you will be asked to find where your media files are. So make sure that you have a folder on your desktop or your computer or your external hard drive where you're going to be pulling this media from. And do keep in mind that, you know, this footage can take up a lot of space. So make sure that you have, I'm going to say this probably again, but make sure that you have enough room on your computer to be doing this editing, or that you have an external hard drive connected so that you're not overloading your computer. Then simply check the assets you wish to use in that folder, in that media folder, in the order that you wish for them to be arranged in your sequence. And then you can drag and drop them later on if you need to reorganize. But again, we want to try to help ourselves by deciding this order in advance. And once you have the asset selected, you'll click Create down here at the bottom. So again, this should look very similar to iMovie. Once you get things into Adobe, you'll start to see that this is a little beyond iMovie, right? There's a lot more bells and whistles here. And we won't get into much of that today, but I am going to show you some of the basics of what we did in iMovie here in Adobe Pro, so that you know, Premiere Pro, so that you know sort of the equivalents. And as you can see, the assets have created a single file that you can preview and make edits and transitions to, just as you would in iMovie. And again, because of time, I'm not going to cover all of the edits and things like that, but I am going to show you that this is a little trickier, but I am going to show you how to export from here. And I will mention I've included a video for reducing background noise, because it's, like I said, a little bit trickier. It takes you into a window where you actually have to use the sliding scale. It's just an extra step or two, but it does help you kind of get to the same thing, which is to reduce that background noise if you're having issues. But I do want to show you how to quickly export from here. So you've brought in your clips, you've arranged them, you've cut them together the way that you want to. And once you're pleased with the videos, you can press export. And you will be given the option to create a file name and a location to export your video to, and you'll click export. And that's pretty easy. But I am going to point out one thing. And great to know if you want a Premiere workshop, I will build this out more. I wasn't sure what was going to be the ideal editing platform that people wanted to know about, hence why I am trying to cover all three in this workshop. But knowing that a Premiere Pro workshop would be desirable, I will definitely do a version of that so that we can get more into some of the nuts and bolts here, since I'm really just giving you the basics. Your video can then be encoded for use. So here are the two things to keep in mind. The more transformations that you add to your video, whatever software you're using, the more time it will take to render and export, and the more computing power it will require. So computing power such as your GPU, your CPU, and your RAM, right? For older computers, this might take several hours to encode just a few minutes long video, right? So we really want to make sure that our equipment can handle what we're throwing at it. You also want to think about your hard drive space and speed, as I was mentioning before, right? Video files can take up a lot of space, and make sure that you have that space available on your computer before you start projects like this. So that's just the very basics of bringing footage in and exporting it out of Adobe Premiere Pro. But since there is interest, I will build that tutorial out. And it's great to know that there's interest in that. So for the final time that we have together, I know we've got about 25 minutes. I'm going to show you a live demo of Davinci Resolve 18. And but first, I'm going to walk you through the installation process, just so that's really clear in case you've never used this product before. And hopefully we'll have enough time and everything goes according to plan. In case it doesn't, Davinci Resolve, I do have a beginner's guide here, but Davinci Resolve was originally a platform for VFX and things like color correction. So those tools may be more than you need, but the basic editing actually is much like iMovie, which is lovely. And it's gives you the capability of going further when and if you're ready, which is why I think it's a really appealing platform to learn and use. And also, it's free for whatever operating system you're using. So it's why I really like this software. Okay, so you're going to go to, and in case you want to follow along, I will drop this in the chat. The Davinci Resolve 18 website, and you're going to click the button for the free download to get started. And it will offer you a download, and you should pick based on what operating system you're using. You'll enter in registration details and hit register and download. Now, if you want to do this for multiple machines, you can. They're not going to stop you. They just want to know how many machines that you're loading it on and how many people are making use of their software. Then it will start downloading as a zip file for you. And so you'll go through the process of unzipping the file for your operating system. I'm doing this on a PC for this demo. It may be slightly different on your machine if it's a Mac, but it should be roughly the same. You'll open the extracted installation file, which is likely to be in your downloads folder if you didn't select somewhere else to download it. And you'll just double click it. And if prompted, click run. And then you'll be prompted to go through the installation process. Keep default settings and click install. Follow the usual instructions of the installation wizard, and then check I accept both, or the I accept box after reviewing the end of user license agreement, or the EULA. Okay, so here, right, you'll decide where you want it to go. You can say next and click install. All of that's very straightforward in the wizard. And the installation is almost complete when the icon is showing up on your desktop. So you'll see it up here. I have it here down here. It's these primary colors, sort of in a Venn diagram. That's the icon for Davinci Resolve. And you can click finish when you're prompted by the installation wizard, and then make sure all your work is saved, because you have to reboot your system. So just an FYI, this is going to make you reboot your system in order to use the software. Now, when you double click on the icon and open the application, you'll click continue to get started, and then you can use the quick setup to make sure that your computer is optimized to use this program. You can skip it, right? You can skip and start right now. Though I'm going to take you through that quick guide just so that you know what it's prompting you for. And this way it'll assess your current equipment and let you know if it's optimized for editing, and maybe help you assess if you want to make some upgrades. So the green check mark and yellow caution icons indicate that Davinci will run, but it might be slow or have some trouble. If you see the red triangle warning, that unfortunately means the system is too old and it's not going to work on your system. So after, you can then select HD 1080 HD or HD at 1080 HD, which is pretty standard. If you don't go through this quick setup, you can always adjust these settings when you're exporting as well. But just so that you know, it does prompt you to sort of set the standard for your project at the beginning through this quick start guide. So the quick setup will prompt you on where you would like your media files stored that you create within the program, and you can leave it at the default folder. That's fine. I'm going to use the Davinci Resolve keyboard shortcuts for this demo, but if you're familiar with another type of editing software that's listed here, you can select one of these keyboard shortcuts instead. So if you're very familiar with the keyboard shortcuts of Adobe Premiere Pro, but you wanted to add some VFX from or color correcting in Davinci Resolve because you think it's easier, you can do that. You can export something out, and then you can be really familiar with the shortcuts of Adobe Premiere Pro if you're going back and forth, right? Then you're finished setting up, and you can get started with that fun, with the fun of editing. And you can get you may get a pop-up at this point, just FYI. Don't panic and go ahead and allow access. Sometimes with downloaded free software, computers just want to verify that it's safe and it's okay, and this one is. Now, this setup should look familiar at this point. You can drag and drop your media into this upper left window, right panel to get started. The preview window is here on the upper right. At the bottom is the timeline panel for where you'll do your editing. And what you may notice at the bottom below that timeline is this additional bottom menu. And this adjusts your panels for you based on where you are within the editing process. I'm going to live demo this next part for you, like I said, with some recent interview footage of mine that I did at the Fowler Museum with Roland Abiodun. He's the John C. Newton Professor of Art History, the history of art and Black Studies at Amherst College in Amherst, Massachusetts. An incredibly wonderful fellow and just an incredible person. It was a real privilege to shoot this interview with him. And he's talking in the interview about a dance wand from the Yoruba peoples of Nigeria, and for this specific project that's coming out of the Fowler. So what I'm going to show you is just some basics, but let's give it a shot and see if we can make this happen. I've already gone ahead and brought in a little bit of footage here, but I'll just show you if I wanted to add more, right? I can go to File, Import, and then Media, or Control L. So that would allow me to get to my file folder. You can see here, I have two different cameras that I was working with, so I can pull in footage from either one of those. I'm not going to do it now just in case it takes a long time to bring something in, but that'll give you your footage. Now, you'll also see as I hover over, I have my cursor and it's showing me a preview of each one of these clips. Now, remember how I mentioned before that you might want to use this and your markers here for your in marker and your out marker, and then drag things down. So I'm going to show how to do that now. So the keyboard shortcuts for Davinci Resolve are just I and O, so in and out. So if I decide that I want maybe just here to be my in point, and I just want to be here for my out point, right? Then I hit O. And now you can see there's two lines here. So that has essentially been marked. So when I bring it into my timeline, it's going to bring me just that section of that clip. If I wanted to do the same for here, right, I might decide that I want this as my in point, this is my out point. And then here's a close-up of the object, right? And I may decide I want something like here is my in point, and here is my out point. So I can decide all of that in advance before I pull things down. When I'm ready, then I can just drag and drop these clips into my timeline. And you'll see it shows up right at the beginning. Make sure I bring it to the front. And also, if I want to make sure that, in fact, what's easier, should go back and let me see if I can move these. I'm just going to move these over here just for a second. I'm going to actually move into my editing panel because this is much easier to work with. What you're going to find is, so I'm moving from cut to edit, and now you can see my whole windows have switched, but it's actually going to make it easier for me to do my work, which is fantastic. They've thought this through. So I see here my clips are still have those in points and out points, and I can drag them in here. Now I can see exactly where my footage starts. So you can see it didn't bring it to the very beginning. So if I pressed play, right, if I press the space bar, you see I've got a lot of blank space there. That's just because my clip didn't get pulled to the 0, 0 point. So I'm just going to click and drag it till it snaps. Now, the snap feature is something that you can turn on and off, but I highly recommend leaving it on because it just makes your life a lot easier. But that's located here. It's this little magnet icon, and that'll let you snap clips to one another. Now, I can also, right, bring in more clips, but maybe I don't want all this footage, right? So obviously I think it's coming a little slow over Zoom, but maybe I want to start it a little later, right? And if that's the case, then I can use what's known as the blade, right? There's trim mode, and then there's the blade mode, and that's the same as split clip. I could also use the B key. So the B key, if I navigate to where I want to go and press B, I've just now split those things into 2 clips. Can everyone see that? Is this coming across okay over Zoom? I'm hoping so. Okay, I'm getting some thumbs up. Good, good. Okay. So once I've decided, maybe I want to cut out this center section, right? So I can hit B again, and I've made another cut here. Now, if I stay in this mode, you'll see my icon, right, when I hover over the clip is still a blade. That's not going to allow me to select and delete. So what I need to do is go back to selection mode, or A, And that will allow me to use my cursor again, and then I can select which clip, right, I want. So I have, oh, let me make sure that that actually cut the way that I wanted it to cut. There we go. So then I made that, so you have to hit the B key and then select where you want it to cut, and it selects, and it makes the cut. And then I can go back using A or the selection tool, and I can cut this part out by hitting delete. And as you can see, because the snap feature is on, it pulls those two clips together. So I don't have to worry about that, having that gap show up. It just snaps them together. Now, if I wanted a transition, I can right click between these two clips, and you'll see as I hover in between, let me click out again, right? As I hover in between, you'll see it goes to those two brackets sort of meeting one another. If I click, that actually will, if I right click, that'll actually allow me to choose from a pre-stocked menu of a transition. And these are all cross dissolves, right? So I could just add a quick cross dissolve and move on if I wanted to. But if I want more options, I can use the effects menu up here, which is actually already turned on, right? And if I use video transitions, right, I can observe by just hovering over what these various options are. You know, depending on what I think is the best one. So maybe smooth cut. And then I can drag and drop it where I want it. And it should add in that transition. So let's go back, see if we've added that transition in. I also want to point out why we're in effects that you can add in tiles. And by tiles, or titles. So these are like tiles that can go on top or in front of your footage. So if you wanted to add an introduction, I can drag and drop this on top, and I can make it longer or shorter. And by double clicking on it, I can come over here and make some right? I can make some, make this italics, I can change the color, right? I want it blue. I can change the sizing to make it bigger or smaller. And when I'm ready, I can click out and bring it back here, and you can actually see that that is now playing over my film.
Other places that we associate actually with water.
So that's not a particularly compelling one, but some of them move, some of them are animated. You can pick what titles you want to use. This is really great for introducing new people, right? If you want to have something come across the screen, if they're a new person that you're interviewing, to make sure that people are aware of who they are. They can also be used for subtitling as well. I do want to quickly point out, since I know we're running out of time, a little bit about the color effects here. So most of the time when you're using Davinci Resolve, you'll probably be using the media, the cut, and the editing menus. You can use Fusion, which is another level, but color, I just want to point out, if for some reason you want to bring in a bunch of different things and then have a sort of similar color palette across them, you can select the clips that you want, and then you can use these preset sort of lighting options to adjust the color. So you can see as I hover over, it gives it a different quality of color to them. So if you wanted to brighten things up, if you wanted to give things a different sort of color style, And then you can also actually get into the nitty-gritty of all of this color adjustment here, right, to give it more quality, and you have quite a bit of control. So the color menu really is quite powerful within Davinci Resolve. I want to show you one other thing, which is how to export, and that's under Deliver. So when we hit Deliver, when we're finished with what we're editing, we'll see this window over here, and we can select how we want to export, right? And the biggest thing is the format. We want to make sure that we're selecting the format that we want. And in this case, I'm going to choose MP4. And then you're going to add it to the render queue. Now, rendering takes a little bit of time, particularly if, for example, you've reduced background sound or you've changed the color settings for all of the footage that you have. That's going to make a big render time for you on export. So just keep that in mind. Depending on how many of these types of effects you've added in, it will affect how long it takes something to export. So that's a brief introduction to Davinci Resolve. I do also want to mention one more tool before we end for today, and that's if you want to snag something from YouTube. Clip Grab is fantastic for this, and if this is for your research, right, you'll be using it under fair use guidelines for your research and not monetizing it in any way, or you're providing proper attribution within the credits of your film. Clip Grab is a great tool for that. And this will allow you to copy a YouTube link and choose to download it as a full MP4 or maybe just as an MP3. For example, if there's particular songs or music that you want to use, this is a great tool for that. If you only need the sound, for example. And it's really handy if you want to make use of other footage in conjunction with your own. So I highly recommend Clip Grab as a tool for that. So just to summarize what we covered today, we've talked about how you can review footage and make your first cuts, right? So cut first, organize clips and bins before you start editing, and then edit things together afterwards. So you always want to do that sort of media folder organization before you get into editing. Then you'll trim heads and tails. We went over how to do that. We talked about transitions, right? A jump cut versus a dissolve and how to add those. We talked about layering in images and other footage over video, just as you saw me do with title. You can also do that with video. I forgot to show you how to do that. Let me quick go to edit. For example, if I wanted to do a cutaway, right? If he's talking about the object and I wanted to cut away, I don't actually have to cut and then insert things in. I can simply, sorry for the sound there. I can simply add that clip in above and then press play, and it will automatically cut away to that either image or alternative video or B-roll that I have. So the program makes that really, really easy to do, and you don't have to do individual editing for that kind of thing. And you can, just as you would for other clips, right? If I wanted to make this longer or shorter, I can. I also should mention, if you want to separate the audio from the video for something that you filmed, you can right click and say link. See how this is toggled on link clips? So the clips are linked. You can see them here. You can click on that and that will de-link them. So then if I wanted to get rid of this audio, right, or move this audio somewhere else, I can. Whereas here, right, if I move this, they move together. And then you can also access it here, depending on what you're, where you're most comfortable in finding linking and unlinking. So we went over that layering, we went over color correction. We discussed how you could adjust sound levels, right? Removing background noise, for example, or enhancing voice. We talked about how to add titles, and we talked about exporting. What I might recommend for next steps is incorporating things like the Ken Burns effect, for example, for documentary is really popular. It allows you to kind of have a zoom in or a zoom out on a static image. So it still gives you that feeling of movement, feeling of cinematography, but with a static image. And so sometimes that can be really helpful at presenting documentary images in a more cinematic way. And I've included a link here, citation and link here to a JSTOR article on the Ken Burns effect, an interview with Ken Burns, why this effect is useful, particularly for archival or documentary style work. And then I've also included a link to an article for the Kuleshov effect, or the montage. Montages are still really, really powerful ways of storytelling. So if you want to create a compelling montage, I have an article here on the Kuleshov effect, recreating the classic experiment. Another thing that we might cover in a future iteration of this workshop, if people are interested, are things like reframing video. You can do that with all of these as well, all of these tools, as well as adding music. We didn't get a chance to today, but I did show you with Clip Grab, right? You could bring something in, and I showed you how you can move audio around. And also adding credits, right? Adding credits at the end is so, so important. The links that I'm talking about to the JSTOR articles are in my slide notes. So I will put those again in the chat, but I'm just going to drop that actual reference directly into the notes in case you're interested, or into the chat in case you're interested. Let me find the link to the slides again, just so that everybody has that as well. So the notes in the slides have everything that I've said today, as well as all the links for things that I've referenced. And before you go, I'd invite you to please take a quick survey for us. It really helps us out at OARC to understand how we're doing with our workshops, if they're meeting the needs of the researchers that we serve, and if there's things that we can do better or expand on in future workshops. So please do just take a few minutes to fill that out. I would really, really appreciate it. And if you would like to reach out, if you have any specific questions beyond what I've presented here today, or you want a one-on-one consultation, I'm always happy to meet with people. We can set up a time to Zoom, or I am on campus, believe it or not, on Mondays, so we can get together on campus as well if you prefer to do that. But thank you all today. And if there are any questions, I know we're just a minute after time, but if there are any questions, I'm happy to stick around. So thank you all.